It is October 17th, 2025, and it is a bad day to be Zelensky, as I think he thought that he was coming to the US to get the red carpet rolled out, to be greeted with Tomahawk cruise missiles and told that he was going to be fully backed by the US, and he got pretty much the exact opposite of that. Instead, he had a very rushed sort of press conference with the Trump administration, with top members of Trump's cabinet and Trump himself seated at the table where they were supposed to be having lunch, with all of these reporters kind of crammed in there yelling questions at them. And while a lot was said, the confirmation that Ukraine would be getting Tomahawks from the US was not something that was included. In fact, every time that Tomahawks were brought up, it was interesting to see how Trump kind of sidestepped it, pointing back to the phone call that he just had on Thursday with Russian President Putin. We're going to be getting into all of the latest here in today's video. But before we do, just a quick note that if you find value in my work and you want to support it, you can always sign up as a paid subscriber on my pages on Substack and on Patreon. You can also send a one-time donation over on my page on Buy Me a Coffee. I'll leave all of the links in the description box below. And now let's get into what's happening in Washington. As Zelensky's visit kicked off with videos showing him landing in the US and apparently being greeted by his top aide, Andrei Yermak, and the members of his own flight crew. So it was safe to say that Zelensky wasn't too thrilled to see the reception he got immediately stepping off of the plane. No members of the Trump administration there, at least from the videos that we've seen going around social media. But on top of that, you also have reports that Zelensky was completely blindsided by this phone call that Trump had with Putin on Thursday. As we saw, his administration kind of announced it last minute, right? It was a bit of a surprise to everyone. We knew that Zelensky was headed to the White House for talks on Friday. We knew that Tomahawks were going to be a big topic of discussion, but then all of a sudden we start hearing reports on Thursday that Trump is planning to have a phone call with Putin, and that he did have what he described as a lengthy and productive phone call. And so Zelensky arrives in the US to very little fanfare, and then he comes to the White House on Friday. And this is where it gets interesting, because I noticed immediately looking at Trump's public schedule for the White House press pool that was posted online, the timing of it all, right? You had 1 p.m. Eastern, Trump was going to greet Zelensky. You had 1:15 p.m., they were set to sit down for a bilateral lunch between members of both of their cabinets. And then at 3 p.m. Eastern, Trump was set to hop on Air Force One and head to Palm Beach, Florida for a weekend at Mar-a-Lago. Now, as a reminder, Trump's phone call that he had with Putin on Thursday lasted for 2.5 hours. That was just the phone call. But here you have Zelensky coming all the way from Poland to the US in person to sit down with Trump, and Trump is giving him less than 2 hours. And when I say that this entire meeting was overshadowed by, one, Trump's phone call with Putin, and two, Trump's announcement that he and Putin plan to meet in person in Budapest, Hungary, in the EU. That was all the reporters really wanted to talk about. They didn't care that Zelensky was there. Zelensky's presence in person at the White House today was meaningless. The reporters mainly were asking questions about Russia, about Trump's talks with Putin. And you know it's bad when even the mainstream media reporters aren't playing the game fully anymore, right? They're not playing the game of acting like Zelensky is anyone important. They know that the real talks are going to be happening between Trump and Putin, and that if there are any major decisions to be made surrounding the war in Ukraine, they're going to happen between the US and Russia. Zelensky is just a puppet here. And it was almost kind of ridiculous to watch this. I'm going to call it press conference, because that's essentially what it was, even though it was very awkwardly set up with all of these reporters crammed into the room where the US and Ukrainian delegations were about to have lunch. You had their questions that, mainly were about Trump and Putin. They did venture into Ukraine. They asked about Tomahawk missiles. They asked about, this ceasefire in Gaza and some questions related to that when it came to what Trump had planned here. But when it came to any responses that Zelensky was able to give, because he wasn't called on very much, but when he did speak, it was all about trying to appease Trump, right? Trying to be like, oh, we need to have talks, blah, blah, blah. We're so grateful to the US for everything that it's done, and so on and so forth. When Trump was asked about Tomahawk missiles, his focus was, oh, yeah, we're going to talk about that, but we need to focus on the upcoming talks with Russia and trying to solve this war, saying that, he wants to try to get this war over with and come to some sort of an agreement. So it did not seem like, from everything that I've seen and from everything that Trump was saying, that he was planning on signing off on Tomahawks for Ukraine. Now, this is, of course, Donald Trump. All of that could flip in a minute, and he could be calling a press conference from Mar-a-Lago this afternoon to announce Tomahawks for Ukraine, for all I know. But I do think that the timing of all of this and the timing of that phone call with Putin was very, very telling. And here's why. Because it's all too easy for Trump to make all of the statements that he's made in recent weeks to threaten to use Tomahawks in the war against Russia, because we know that would, of course, require direct US involvement. That's easy. But then when you have Zelensky coming to DC expecting to get the green light on Tomahawks, I did think it was very notable that just one day before that visit, all of a sudden, Trump's got a call with Putin. They're talking about dialogue, about plans to meet. Well, now Trump can't exactly sign off on Tomahawks easily. I mean, it is Donald Trump. It would not surprise me if he did literally anything at this point. But if he did sign off on Tomahawks right after talking to Putin and right after getting this direct warning from the Russian president that, look, we know that these weapons require direct US military personnel involvement in each attack. And as Putin has been very careful in crafting his warnings, he said this would completely ruin the progress that the US and Russia have made. Now, when Putin is saying that, he's not really saying that to you or I. He's saying that directly to Donald Trump. He's telling Trump, hey, look, I want to talk with you. I'm acknowledging that we've made quote unquote progress, even though Putin's probably thinking about the progress that Russian troops are currently making on the battlefield. But he's telling Trump, he's like, hey, look, we've made so much progress this year. I just want to keep talking. So then that puts Trump in a position where now he's looking around and going, well, wait a second, if I agree to all of these meetings with, Russian officials and Putin, we have everything lined up. Why would I screw up all of that by approving Tomahawks for Ukraine? Which is why I think they had that phone call in the first place, because I don't think that the US particularly wants to send Tomahawks right now. They would love to threaten them, right? The threat is currently there, and I guess it can still be there if Putin and Trump meet face to face in Budapest and Trump feels like there's not enough progress being made. But to authorize them right now, when, as Trump himself is now saying, we need to make sure we have Tomahawks for the US. And that goes back to that Financial Times report from earlier this week when they brought up the fact that, look, the US maybe has 20 to 50 Tomahawks to provide for Ukraine if they were going to go that route. So not only would they not change the balance of power on the battlefield, they would not do anything for the Ukrainian forces on the front lines, but they would further increase tensions between the US and Russia drastically so. And that brings me to the other part of this press conference, because as we saw, there were some questions that had nothing to do with Russia and Ukraine, a couple of which were about Venezuela. And as we've heard, even confirmed by Trump just this week, he has authorized covert CIA operations inside Venezuela. His administration is not hiding the fact right now that they want regime change. They want to force President Nicolas Maduro out of office for good this time, because they didn't get it done the first time around. And as you had a couple of questions about Venezuela, you also had Trump say that, yes, Maduro is doing everything he can, that he's offering everything he can because he, quote, doesn't want to F around with the United States. Now, he said the real word. I'm not going to say that word, but That was how Trump concluded this press conference. And what that says to me is that that is where he wants to be focused, right? He doesn't want to spend hours and hours meeting with Zelensky, doesn't really want to sign off on Tomahawk missiles for Ukraine, especially now that he has these upcoming talks with Russia. No, he wants to focus on Venezuela and on what the CIA has prepared for Venezuela. So, based on Trump's rhetoric today, I think it was a very important reminder that we need to be keeping an eye on Venezuela, because Trump certainly is. Also, a reminder that just because the red carpet wasn't rolled out for Zelensky this time around, just because he didn't get Trump greeting him and telling him, here's all of the Tomahawks we have in our arsenal, let's go to further war against Russia, that doesn't exactly mean that the US is done with the proxy war against Russia. Because we have to remember that while, yes, we are going to see upcoming talks between US and Russian officials, yes, there are plans for a direct summit between Trump and Putin in Budapest, the US is still directly involved in this war. And we have yet to see any meaningful action taken by the Trump administration to show that they have any plans to change that. Sure, they'll say that they're going to sell weapons to Europe to give to Ukraine to use against Russia. Sure, they'll claim that, oh, this isn't our war, this is Biden's war. But the reality is that when it comes to the US military intelligence sharing, when it comes to the overall support, when it comes to the sanctions, we have still not seen any meaningful change from the Trump administration to tell us that they are serious about an end to not just the war in Ukraine, but to the proxy war against Russia as a whole. And that's something everyone should be talking about. If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, leave a comment, share it with your friends, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also check out Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/rachelblevins. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.